People with talent and skills are able to create simply incredible things. Artists, sculptors, and other creators of beautiful works are truly living proof of that. Yes, indeed. The process of the inception of producing artwork is long and painstaking, but those who are devoted to their work are able to create something from a cold dead stone, bronze, or make a clay statue of a person who will be able to stand up and go in his merry way. In this Generation UA program, Ukrainian sculptors will talk about how to fashion such seemingly faceless clay material into a beautiful shape that will amaze and enrapture viewers. There are many talented people, but not all of them develop their talent. I think that almost all people who invest in themselves and are preoccupied in themselves, be it a sculpture or some other art form, I think that they can achieve very high results. Making a sculpture requires understanding that it stands out among all other art forms due to its size and the volume of work involved in this process. That is, a sculpture is three-dimensional, as it is created in the realm of space. Regarding sculpture as an art form, this is something that has the author's imprint. If it has an imprint of someone's talent, someone's creativity, then it can be called genuine art. Regarding a Ukrainian sculptor or a sculptor in any other country, this is a person that possesses certain technical skills and knowledge in building forms, and of course is a person that has a certain degree of talent and invests their time into this talent, which can also be developed. It seems to me that today it is quite popular, given that it is not a popular profession in general, and also a narrow specialization. Because, for example, in the case of artists, graphic artists, the application is slightly broader. Sculpture is a heavy weight in art, as it is difficult in terms of technical work and material. So it is generally not very popular. I decided to become a sculptor in my adult years. I joined the academy at the age of 21, but basically I sculpted and molded since my childhood for as long as I can remember. I was always interested in sculpting, was eager to visit places with sculptures, where you could see a sculpture exhibition, and I was even thrilled to see a monument to some person. I was very interested in this, but I figured out that this could be my specialty, and that it could be a profession for me later in life than most people typically realize and eventually define as a true profession. Most of all, I like working with clay. First of all, the process of molding itself.
Больше всего, наверное, мне нравится сама работа с глиной, сама лепка.
I like working with a material, in particular with stone. This is my favorite material, though I must admit that it's very difficult to work with. On the upside, it's also very interesting work. There is no adding stuff to it. You have to plan and manage all the work accurately and with intent, and there is some mystery in this, because if something goes wrong, you will have to decide on the entire course of the work process in a totally different manner. In sculpture, I'm most attracted by work with dimensions, that is, work from all sides. This way, you can see your artwork from all angles, and you can go through it in detail. I joined the metal art department of the Boychuk Institute, where accordingly I began to get acquainted with the material. For the most part, we were working with jewelry there, with different jewelry techniques, and it was there that I became interested in small statuary work. And in the final student years in sculpture classes, I got a desire to do something more than we did at the Institute, and from that moment I began to take an interest in this sphere. I began attending extra classes, and after graduation I decided to find for my personal development courses in a place where I could go with this specific objective and study this particular subject. In Ukraine, there are institutions where you can study sculpture. As they apply to children, these are art schools, and after they finish studying in an art school, they have a great opportunity to join the academy, specifically the Kyiv Academy of Arts. There are similar academies in Odessa and Kharkiv, and there are also many design schools all throughout Ukraine in general. There are also private initiatives. As for the concentration of talented young people who are interested talented in sculpture, and this is probably true not only when it comes to sculpture. The most concentrated areas are the Kiev Oblast and Western Ukraine, and there are also very talented and qualified sculptors from Eastern Ukraine.
Я считаю, что каждой профессии можно.
I believe that every profession can be mastered, just like drawing and sculpture, just like any profession in the world. First of all, you must have a strong desire and work with a specific aim. This is the #1 rule. In terms of this distinct feeling about people having a talent, I wouldn't be so sure. It is primarily work. Yes, there is some kind of a sense of space, a sense of proportions. Yes, it works, but without constant improvement, the result will not be achieved. This takes 8 hours or more of hard work in a workshop. Creative work takes up all 24 hours of the day. You are constantly at work and always thinking about the essence of the work and what it should look like.
Работы творческой — это все 24 часа. Постоянно в работе, постоянно в размышлении, о чем это должно быть.
I studied more in private schools, mainly private workshops of sculptors and artists. My first teacher is the sculptor Mykola Sivak. I began to study at his place and prepared myself a long time to enter the academy. I tried to enter it 3 times, but the process was rather complicated at the time. Later, I studied drawing at the art studio and improved my skills. And after that, there was the academy. At the beginning of my education, the main difficulty was working on the drawing, as it was one of the exams for admission to the academy. And for some reason, I took more of a liking to sculpting than to drawing, and today I do not draw. I'm truly more of a sculptor. I literally found my first art recently at my parents' home. It is a small sculpture made of sandstone, which I made at the age of 7 or 8 years. For me, it was a starting point that gave me the inspiration to continue working as a sculptor in the future. At the institute, I was taught the sculpture by Valery Fedichev. I studied in his class and later received extra tuition during the 4th year, when I became interested in this. After that, I studied a course in the sculpture shop. I think I faced the greatest difficulties in the institute due to the distinctive and special features of the curriculum. We had very few hours devoted to sculpture. When you are having 1 or 2 classes a week, it's not much of anything. One needs to constantly engage in sculpture on a regular and systematic basis, and that is what will give you the desired, necessary and ultimate result. My first work was a bronze sculpture titled Waiting. This statuette is not large. It is 15 centimeters high, depicting a woman who is sitting on a rock and waiting for something. In this statuette, everyone sees something of their own, something close to them, and what this person experienced in life, which is a reflection of their own personal view. There were difficulties. We were taught the sculpting itself in the institute, but I did not know how to work with the material. I did not know how to go through the whole process. Therefore, I studied literature, watched all sorts of videos on YouTube and on other social networks. So, by trial and error, I managed to accomplish my goal, and the work lasted about a month and a half. The types of sculpture include monumental sculptures. I think it's obvious. This is something that is higher than a human scale, and up to incredible limits and scales. Monumental and decorative. This is when the sculpture is part of some architectural ensemble of the building. Indoor sculptures, human scale and less. Reliefs, high reliefs, sunken reliefs. These are already, let's say, something that goes above the surface to a greater or lesser extent, and the sunken relief is what, on the contrary, sinks into depression. This is basic stuff. As for genres, there are classic genres of sculpture. For example, the portrait genre, historical genre, the symbolic genre, and the allegorical genre, and a few more. But now, as this sculpture interacts with all other kinds of art, everything is so intertwined. A lot of new works appear, in particular installations, which are often correlated with sculpture because they deal with space. In Ukraine, perhaps the most popular genre is a portrait or a household genre. But with the orientation towards European and generally international trends, contemporary sculptors, young ones, are now paying attention to abstract sculptures and some absolutely minimalistic forms. They're working with the installation.
видов скульптуры мне ближе сейчас формальная абстрактная скульптура.
From the types of sculpture, I'm closer now to formal abstract sculpture, such as minimalistic forms. Though this is because I studied classical sculpture, and now I'm holding courses on classical sculpture. Of course, I work with classical sculpture, but less than before. Most of the work and the main part of the ideas that I try to implement are closer to a minimalistic, formal sculpture.
Стараюсь воплощать в жизнь. Это минималистичная формальная скульптура. В основном идеи все из головы.
Basically, I take ideas out of my head, but I can't name exactly where they come from. I do not know. Well, it's basically the same work. You just need to allocate time, sit down and come up with concepts. There's basically no such thing as ideas just appearing in this way just out of the blue. The classic material for sculpture is clay, but clay is first of all a material for modeling, and later, in order to preserve the work, we already transform it into solid materials. Most of all, I like to work with a stone. It's my favorite material. I tried to work with many materials, but I gave preference to working on stone, even though I started from the hardest stone. I was very interested in trying it, and later I came across a huge chunk of a granite curve and created my first stone work from it. I now continue working with many types of stone, but since that one was the most difficult, most complex material, basically all the others are already quite easy to work with and create something incredible.
I
like modern sculpture, but only if it is based on classical samples. That is, the author must have academic training, they must know the basics, and to create something own and new, already using these basics. That's what I like, something modern, not yet cliched. At the moment, I'm experimenting with materials, trying new ones, but the most frequent guest of my workshop is bronze. It's like a classic, although it's expensive, but bronze and silver are integral elements of my work. I am also engaged in jewelry. I do not really want to work with a stone and somehow buy blocks of it. And since I was trained in the art of metalwork, mostly jewelry, I already knew how to work with metal, with copper, silver, so bronze was a piece of cake for me. Most of all, I like the technique of casting. Its process begins with modeling, in which first a sketch is sculpted in plasticine or in clay, and then work is completed using the same materials on a scale of 1 to 1. Then it is molded, and the form is removed from it, into which the wax is then poured. This wax is processed and sent to the foundry, where it is cast in the appropriate type of metal, most often in bronze. And then I already process this bronze, grind and polish it. Most of all, I like the very moment of sculpting, the moment of modeling, when I create a form, when the work is creative. The process is moving on, and something comes to my mind, and I start to detract from the original sketch, and then the model is born right before my eyes. I get the greatest pleasure from this very moment in this process. Literally, over the last several years, competitions in Ukraine are becoming more frequent, and this applies to artistic projects as well. It's hard to say why. Maybe because there is an overall enhancement and uplift of some kind of a national idea. There are foreign grants and organizations that support talented people in Ukraine. The most important thing is not to be lazy, to take the time in applying for these grants and participating in the process to push forward this initiative and find support for it. One of the last contests in which I took part was an exhibition of figurative art in Spain. They were very pleased with the work, found it very good, and so I left it there, in one of the schools, in one of the studios of classical art. It is very beneficial for artists to take part in exhibitions, because this allows them to hear the opinions of others and get their feedback, because in the workshop at home, it's difficult to assess the work independently. You can objectively look yourself at your own work by exhibiting it in another space. Indeed, after changing the lighting and changing the interior, it is already much easier to evaluate the work objectively. My sculptural in-crowd are people from the courses of the sculpture shop, Ivan and all the other students. This is my in-crowd. There is a creative community in Ukraine. It is localized in Kiev, and it is large enough because there are more artists here. This is a cultural center, and everyone here socializes with one another.
Здесь все общаются